The Drev-Saal Compact's first contact protocols were considered, by those who had studied them, the most sophisticated in the known galaxy. They had been developed over 800 years, refined through 46 contact events, and updated after each one to incorporate the lessons learned. They were detailed. They were nuanced. They accounted for an extraordinary range of possible first contact scenarios: hostile receptions, fearful receptions, indifferent receptions, technologically primitive receptions, receptions from species with no concept of external civilization, receptions from species that had been expecting contact for generations. The protocols did not account for the scenario that occurred when their first contact vessel arrived at humanity's third planet on a Thursday morning in November. The scenario was 11 million humans in a single city, publicly processing collective grief at a scale and intensity that the Drev-Saal's cultural analysis team would spend the next 4 years trying to fully document. The city was Washington, D.C. The grief was for a former world leader whose death, 3 days prior, had produced an outpouring of public mourning that had drawn people from every nation on Earth to stand in lines that stretched for kilometers, in weather that the planet's northern hemisphere considered deeply unpleasant, to pay their respects. The streets were full of black-clothed humans moving slowly, in silence, many of them crying. Others stood still, heads bowed. Music played, mournful, heavy, with the specific quality of music designed to give sorrow a shape it could inhabit. At intervals, there were structures draped in dark fabric. At intervals, humans placed flowers, hundreds of thousands of flowers, at specific locations. The Drev-Saal cultural analyst assigned to the preliminary visual survey was named Ter Von. He was experienced, careful, and possessed of a genuinely sophisticated cross-cultural interpretive framework that had served him well across 14 prior contact events. He looked at the survey footage. He looked at it again. He wrote in his field notes, "Incoming data suggests a significant ritual gathering of the subject species' dominant political center. Scale, approximately 11 million individuals. Behavioral indicators suggest high emotional intensity, physical displays of distress, ritualized slow movement, mournful auditory signals that by structures decorated in symbolic colors, mass presentation of organic offerings at designated sites." He paused. He reviewed the behavioral analysis module's interpretation of the data. The module had run the observed behaviors against its database and returned a confidence-weighted assessment. The top result, at 67% confidence, was pre-battle ritual. The observed behaviors are consistent with known patterns of ritualized emotional preparation for feat. Significant collective conflict, mourning of anticipated casualties, dedication of the coming action to fallen predecessors, collective psychological mobilization. Ter Von looked at the assessment. He looked at the footage. 11 million humans did. Moving slowly. Weeping. Placing flowers. The module's confidence interval was 67%. He filed his preliminary report and flagged it for the mission commander. What happened next would be studied in Drev-Saal contact training for the next 200 years as the foundational case study in a module titled The Catastrophic Consequences of Insufficient Cultural Context. Mission Commander Valdon read the preliminary report and made a decision that was, given the information she had, entirely reasonable. She moved the first contact vessel to high alert. This was protocol. If the survey data suggested that a species was in a state of pre-conflict mobilization, particularly at the scale of 11 million, gathered in a single location, which by any military analysis represented an extraordinary concentration of force, the appropriate response was to increase readiness, expand the sensor sweep, and prepare for a range of scenarios that might include an attempt to engage the contact vessel as a foreign presence. The expanded sensor sweep confirmed. The gathering was not limited to the capital city. Similar gatherings, smaller, but structurally identical in absurd behaviors were occurring in cities across the planet. The mournful auditory signals, music, and something the translation module identified as ritualized group vocalization in a minor key were broadcasting globally on multiple communication frequencies. The planet appeared to be preparing collectively, simultaneously, at global scale. Veldan called her senior staff. "I want an assessment," she said. "Not the module's assessment. Yours. What are we looking at?" Cultural analyst Prethkan, who was young, thorough, and had been assigned to this mission specifically because of her work on cross-species emotional expression, spoke first. "The behaviors are emotionally intense," she said carefully. "The distress displays are significant. If this is pre-battle ritual, it's unlike any I've reviewed. The grief indicators are very strong." "Grief indicators," Veldan said. "There's a possibility," Prethkan said, with the careful emphasis of someone offering a minority interpretation against an established assessment, "that we are observing actual grief, that the gathering is funerary rather than preparatory, that the species has experienced a significant loss and is processing it collectively." Nyan, Tolkien. The table was quiet. "At this scale," the tactical officer said, 11 million in one city. You're saying they grieve at this scale?" Preth Khan looked at her data. "The human file suggests they're capable of extraordinary collective emotional responses," she said. "Their cultural documentation includes multiple historical instances of large-scale public mourning. I think this warrants a. The module confidence is 67% for pre-battle," the tactical officer said. 67% means 33% is something else," Preth Khan said. The argument went for 2 hours. Veldan made her decision. She would proceed with first contact as scheduled. The approach was already committed, and delaying would create its own complications, but would do so from a posture of elevated readiness, with full diplomatic protocols active, and with Preth Khan's funerary hypothesis flagged as a live alternative interpretation, requiring rapid assessment upon contact. DOI. She opened the hailing channel. The human government's Alien Contact Response Division had been operational for 11 years. It had protocols. It had trained personnel. It had, since the peace establishment of the Galactic Community Relationship, a standing team on rotation specifically for unexpected contact events. What it did not have on this particular Thursday was its full senior staff. Because this particular Thursday was the third day of the state funeral. Director Amara Oze, no relation to the ambassador, though people always asked, had been on duty for 31 consecutive hours when the alert came through. She had been managing the intersection of the state funeral's global security logistics and the routine monitoring of galactic communication channels, which was already a significant workload, when her communications officer said, in the tone of someone who has just found something very unexpected in a queue, "That was supposed to be routine, Director. We have an approach signal." She looked at the approach data. She looked at the vessel designation, Drev-Saal, a civilization she knew from the contact files. No direct prior diplomatic relationship, theoretically. Friendly, 46 prior contact events with other species on record. She looked at the alert status reading on the incoming vessel. "They're at combat readiness," her tactical analyst said. "I can't see that," she said. "It might be standard approach protocol for a new contact," the analyst offered. "It might be," she agreed. "Or they looked at 11 million people in the streets and got the wrong idea." She was quiet for a moment. 31 hours without sleep. The state funeral. The grief that had been everywhere for 3 days. In the streets, visible from her window. In the voices on every broadcast channel. in the faces of her own staff, some of whom had been crying at their desks and working anyway because the job didn't stop. She thought about what an alien civilization, with no cultural context, would make of what was happening outside her window right now. "Get me a translation channel," she said, "and get me Dr. Vasquez." The former ambassador was retired, but remained on the emergency consultant list, and Director Oze had a strong feeling that whatever was about to happen was going to require someone who had done this before. The translation channel opened. "Oi!" She took a breath. "Drev-Saal vessel," she said. "This is Director Amara Ose of Earth's Alien Contact Response Division. Welcome. We're aware of your approach. I want to address something before we go further, because I think there may be a misunderstanding about what you're seeing on the surface." A pause. Then the response, in the careful language of first contact protocols. Director Oze Daitai. "We are receiving your transmission. We note the significant mobilization we are observing on the surface. We wish to clarify the nature of..." "You think we're preparing for war," Director Osi said. A longer pause. "The observed behaviors are consistent with certain preparatory..." "We are burying someone we love," Director Osi said. "The gathering you see is a funeral. The music is mourning music. The flowers are for the dead. The turn. Weeping is grief." She paused. I know from the outside. At this scale, it probably looks like something else. But I want you to understand what you're actually seeing." "Yeah, el soy." The silence on the channel stretched. "Yes, educante." Then the Drev-Saal voice said, very carefully, 11 million. 11 million, she confirmed. "In this city. Similar gatherings in cities around the world. There are more people watching from home. Billions. For one individual. For one person," she said, "who mattered to us." The channel was very quiet for a long time. Cultural analyst Preth Khan had been right. This was acknowledged internally immediately by everyone on the Drev-Saal command staff who had been in the room 2 hours ago. It was acknowledged without fanfare. This was not the moment for internal recrimination, and the tactical alert status was quietly reduced as Veldon listened to Director Auzi's explanation and felt the particular shift that happened when a 67% confidence assessment collapsed and the 33% alternative turned out to be the truth. She listened to Director O.C. describe the individual who had died. A leader, a figure who had, over decades of public life, accumulated a weight of meaning for hundreds of millions of people. That was, Director Ose explained, not entirely about policy or achievement. It was about something harder to quantify. Presence. The specific quality of a person who had been part of the collective life for so long that their absence created a shape that people could feel. "We don't just grieve the person," Director O.C. said. "We grieve the version of ourselves that existed in relationship to them. The world they were part of. When someone like that dies, the world changes shape. And 11 million people coming to stand in the cold and be present in that changed shape together. That's not preparation for anything. That's humans being humans. We process things together. Loudly. In public. For as long as it takes." Veldon was quiet for a moment. "In the Drev-Saal tradition," she said carefully, "grief is private, individual. The loss of a significant figure is acknowledged collectively. But the theo expression is contained, measured. How long?" Director Oze asked. "A designated period," Veldon said. 3 days. Formal. Then concluded. Director Oze thought about the 11 million people in the streets, about the lines that had started forming before the death, was even officially announced. About the flowers accumulating in quantities that had required municipal logistics coordination. About the people who had traveled from the other side of the planet to stand in line for 6 hours in the cold. "We're on day 3, she said. "We'll probably be on day 7 before it starts to settle." "Nyat? And then it'll come back on the anniversary. And 5 years from now someone will mention them and people will cry. And 20 years from now their grandchildren will put flowers somewhere and feel the shape of the absence. May? Wouldn't be? What's that?" She paused. "We don't really have a conclusion to grief. We just have different distances from it." Preth Khan, listening from her station, was writing very quickly. Now, Veldon looked at her ship's display. At the planet below, blue and white. The streets of the capital city still visible on the surface sensor feed as dark. Lines of movement, thousands of small figures still moving slowly, still placing their flowers, still standing in the cold. "I want to ask you something," Veldon said. "Not formally, not for the contact record." "Go ahead," Director Ozzy said. "Is it?" Veldon paused. "Does it help? The gathering? Does the presence of 11 million other people in their grief, does it make the grief smaller?" Director Ozzy said. "No, it doesn't make it smaller." She thought for a moment. "It makes it held. The grief doesn't get smaller. But you're not carrying it alone. You're carrying it together. And together, somehow, it's possible to carry it." The channel was quiet. "That is," Veldon said finally, "the most alien thing I have heard in 46 contact events." Director Ozzy laughed. A short, tired, genuine laugh. "Which part?" "All of it," Veldon said. "The scale of it. The public nature of it. The fact that 11 million people would choose to stand in the cold together, rather than be warm alone." A pause. "In the Drev-Saal experience, grief is the most private of states. The most internal. To share it at this scale," she stopped. "How do you bear it? How do you stand in the middle of 11 million people, all feeling the same thing, and not be overwhelmed?" Director Ozai said. "You are overwhelmed. That's the point. You surrender to it, and it holds you, and somehow the overwhelm is better than the isolation." Oh, she paused. "I know that doesn't make logical sense." "Neo, change it. But I'll see you." "No," Veldon said. "It doesn't." A pause. "But I think," Veldon said very quietly, "that I understand it anyway." The formal first contact ceremony was rescheduled, not cancelled. Director Ozzy had made clear that the timing was, in fact, not problematic from a human perspective. Funerals and historic events could coexist. Life didn't pause. But rescheduling gave the Drev-Saal time to complete their cultural recalibration, to replace the 67% confidence assessment with something more accurate, and to give Preth Khan time to begin the extensive analytical work that the past 12 hours had clearly made necessary. Preth Khan requested, and was granted, permission to attend the rescheduled ceremony in person. She wanted to see it. Not the ceremony itself, the continued. Public mourning. The streets. She wanted to stand in it. Veldon approved the request with the understanding that Preth Khan would document everything, and that the documentation would form the basis of a comprehensive revision of the Drev-Saal Compact Protocol section on cross-species emotional expression. Preth Khan arrived in the city on the 6th day. Director Ozzy met her at the transport point personally, which was, Preth Khan understood, itself a significant gesture. The director had been working for 6 days with minimal sleep. She had managed a first contact event simultaneously with a global state funeral. She was visibly tired in the way of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and was not quite done yet. She took Prethcon to the memorial site. They walked. The streets were quieter than the sensor footage had suggested, which was itself a datum, Prethcon noted, because quieter in this context meant perhaps 3,000 or 4,000 people per city block, rather than 10,000. The kind of quiet that was still overwhelming by most species standards. The flowers were still coming. The people moving in the slow, deliberate way that Prethcon now understood was not military formation, but collective processing. The physical expression of grief given motion. They stood at the edge of the main memorial site. Prethcon looked at the flowers, at the photographs and drawings and written messages that had accumulated around the memorial. Thousands of them. Handwritten, left by individuals who had wanted to say something to someone who could no longer hear it and had said it anyway. They wrote letters, she said. To the dead. Yes, Director Oze said, knowing they can't be read. Knowing, Director Oze confirmed. Prethcon thought about the paper on human poetry, about the Dylan Thomas poem, and the act of saying something that could not change anything because the PU saying mattered anyway. About love that didn't care whether it would work. She thought about the letters. The saying matters, she said slowly. Director Oze looked at her. Something on her face shifted, the tired diplomat registering something unexpected. You've read Diallo's work, she said. The poetry paper. Yes. Prethcon looked at the letters. She said humans made grief into a gift for strangers. So the stranger would know they weren't alone, in their dark. She looked at the thousands of messages. This is that. Yes, Director Oze said softly. They stood in the quiet of the chain-shaped world for a while. Then Director Oze said, Would you like to leave one? Prethcon looked at her. I didn't know him. I'm not. You don't have to have known someone to acknowledge that they existed and that their absence matters. Director Oze found a small card in her pocket. The kind that had accumulated everywhere over 6 days. Small memorial cards available at dozens of locations through the city. She offered it. You have been standing in our grief for 2 hours. That's not nothing. Prethcon took the card. She thought for a long time about what to write. She wrote, in the Drev-Saal script that no human could read. I arrived expecting something I did not find. I found something I did not expect. I am grateful for the difference. She placed it with the others. She stood back. Beside her, Director Oze was quiet. What did you write? She asked. Prethcon told her. Director Oze was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the voice of someone who has been holding something for 6 days and has just found a place to set it down. That's a good thing to have written to you. They stood there a while longer. Around them, the world grieved, loudly, publicly, together, as it had always done, as it would always do. The species that had decided 10,000 years ago that the only way to carry impossible weight was to carry it with someone else. Prethcon wrote in her field notes. The module was wrong. The cultural analysis was wrong. We looked at 11 million people in their grief and saw preparation for war. We saw the wrong thing. The right thing, the true thing, is almost impossible to see from the outside and requires, I have concluded, simply standing in it. Recommendation: revise protocols to include a third category, alongside hostile and peaceful, for the contact reception state that is neither of those things. The category should be called present, as in, the species is fully present in something, and the fullness of that presence looks, from the outside, like intensity of a military kind, but is in fact intensity of the human kind, which is a different thing entirely and considerably more important. Secondary recommendation: bring a card. The formal revision of the Drev-Saal Compact protocols, completed 18 months after the first contact event, added 4 pages to the section on cross-by species emotional expression. The pages included a detailed analysis of human grief behavior, with special attention to the distinction between collective mourning and collective mobilization. Now, they included guidance on observational indicators that distinguished the two. They included a note, written by Drev-Saal, that read, "When in doubt, look for the flowers. Military mobilization does not involve flowers. If you are seeing flowers, you are seeing grief. Approach accordingly, with care, with time, and with the understanding that you are entering something that humans consider sacred, not because it is designated as such, but because they have made it so by the weight of their presence in it." The pages also included, in a section labeled Personal Note from Field Analyst, a photograph. It was a small photograph, taken on a phone camera, slightly out of focus. It showed 2 figures standing at the edge of a memorial site. One was tall, clearly non-human, holding something small. The other was a tired human woman with her hands in her pockets, looking at the accumulated flowers. Neither of them was looking at the camera. The caption, written in Drev-Saal's hand, was, "Day 6, now Washington D.C. We stood in it together." It helped